Okay, Rosemary, do you just want to tell us who you are?
I'm Rosemary Machacek. I've lived in Lincoln for a long time.
And what role did you play in the commission and when?
I was affiliated with what was called the Lincoln-Lancaster Commission on the Status of Women. Interesting. From about 1973 to about 1984. So, good 10 years for sure. And I started out on the education committee, and that was my home committee for the entire time I was on the commission. Most people at the time I was on the commission started out on a committee and learned the ropes of the commission, learned about the commission itself, and then learned about their committee and the issues that affected their committee, and then started to see how their committee fit into the whole picture of what the commission was doing. So it was, as I said, it was titled the Commission on Status of Women, and it was mostly funded by a CETA grant. CETA is an old federal grant program with a small amount from the city and county, but we had an executive director, and that was Chris Funk, and paid a very small salary, nothing, a pittance. And we had a public information and publications person part-time, and that was Vicki Bogrowski. She lives in California now, and is a professional writer. Very, very talented person too. Both women were just phenomenal. And then we had 28 commissioners appointed by the mayor, the city council, the county board, and most commissioners came to the Commission on Status of Women through committees. And they served as long as they liked, reappointed each year. Some women served for a while, some women served longer. Lots of us thought we needed to get away and do other things and let other women come up. Through the committee system, we were kept getting women. We went out and did speakers bureaus and got women to start coming on the committees and come through the commission. So they had a really good idea, we hoped, of where the commission was going and what we were doing. We met once a month, except for special meeting times. The committees also met once a month, more if they needed extra work and time to do things. Commissioners held fundraisers for money to fund projects, such as the surveys we conducted on issues, speakers conferences and programs, conferences and activities, and part of the money for salaries, whatever we could do to raise money. And we did all kinds of things, just amazing things. I don't mean amazing as in wonderful and stupendous, I mean amazing, where do they get the kind of nerve to do that? But we did, and we had a great time. The committees performed lots of projects. Most of the work of the commission came up through the committee structure. So the committees researched the issues, and they presented. And there would be like 4 committee members on the commission who were commissioners present the ideas. The commission would they would teach other commissioners what was going on in their committee, and we need action on this issue. We need to do a survey on this issue. We need to do X, Y, Z, and the commissioners would then support. So you never were just alone and you're lonesome on the committee, hoping everything worked out okay. You were among an army of really dedicated women who were right there with you on various committees. But when you had to speak in public, when you had to advocate for something, we were there helping each other, standing up for each other all the way along. The committees and the issues. Employment was one of the committees. Fair hiring, promotion, and other HR practices were focuses of that committee in public and private businesses. We all wore little green buttons with a white 59 cents because women made, at that time, 59 cents for every dollar men made. We not only tackled the issue of equal work for equal pay, but equal pay for work of equal value. We talked a lot about that because we had evidence in a variety of cities around the country and here in Lincoln and in Omaha that parking lot attendants often were paid more than child care workers.
Is that right?
And if that isn't work of equal value, I mean, a parking lot attendant is important, but if we say children are our most important resource and the most valuable thing in our lives, then why would we not pay child care workers? But child care workers have traditionally been low-paying jobs.
Right.
Still are, they're better than they used to be, but that's an example. The Employment Committee did a survey of women in businesses and how they were treated, published the results. They often worked with the UNL Business College on these issues. We formed alliances with allegiances with other groups and whatever we could. They conducted employment conferences to teach women about their rights. Job fairs to help women find jobs. A lot of us helped with the YWCA job outfitters to get women decent clothing.
Sorry, there's a problem. Is the receiver, is there something wrong? Oh, can I get
Yeah, it's the yellow light's flashing.
Let me check on that. Pause this really quickly. Sorry about that. And we're good to go.
Okay, I mentioned at the end of the employment that the employment committee did employment conferences to teach women about their rights, and job fairs to help women find jobs, job outfitters to help them prepare for jobs with clothing, did all kinds of things that would surround employment. And they worked very closely with the child care committee because, of course, women who want to go out and work outside the home full-time or part-time have to find someplace, in instances where they have children, something to do with their children that doesn't make them terrified that something bad will happen. So the committees worked together all the time, as did the education committee with the employment committee, preparing for a job with education. Okay, the health committee dealt with women's access to quality health care, reproductive health care, contraceptions, as well as all other health care, particularly considering what low-income women have to face, and how difficult it is to be underinsured or uninsured, and how single-parent women, for example, with no insurance or very little, have trouble with their children, and so on, how to get access. Women's relationships to predominantly male doctors and the there, dear syndrome, as I call it all the time. It's just in your head. And being believed and seen as credible people to the medical profession. Breastfeeding and arranging breastfeeding when women return to work after childbirth. That was part of, and Anne worked on that committee, particularly I remember Anne Reschke worked on that committee, and that was one of the issues that was on the health committee. Support for women practitioners in medicine, including women who are doctors, technologists, and nurses. Supporting what they do and their voices in medicine. Conferences to teach women about their own bodies and health care, and advocating for themselves and their bodies, and advocating for reproductive freedom to be able to use contraceptions to limit their families. I remember reading in a book called Sisterhood is Powerful, a collection of essays, that women who can't control reproductive freedom, don't have reproductive freedom, can't control their reproductive cells, are really in bad shape when they try to find jobs. And so that was important to the women on the healthcare committee, and us too. Women in expanded roles for nurses. We testified in the legislature on the certified nurse midwifery bill that would enable certified nurses to become midwives, and nurses to do other certified nurse activities. The other issue that they tackled all the time, that we all tackled from various standpoints, was the abortion issue. Safe, legal abortions. Roe versus Wade, the decision of the Supreme Court, only happened in 1973. And already people were doing their best to try to dismantle that at the state level. If we can't get the Supreme Court to go along with us, we'll get state legislatures where we can scare them to death and tell them they'll never be elected to any office again if they don't go along with us. So that was an issue, but that was an issue for the whole commission. We had a speakers bureau presentation on abortion, and we marched out and spoke and stood on our feet and told people what we believed and why. And no apologies. You know, you may disagree with us, but we're not apologizing for the stands we've taken. We've done research, we know what we're talking about, and we're not afraid to say something about it. Child care was another wonderful committee. They were leaders in Lincoln's understanding of the need for quality, affordable child care. Women are still the people who are mostly the child care decision makers in the family, and to whom child care falls as part of her job. Even though there are single parent men, and men much more supportive of child care and expanding roles in the family, still women face that issue all the time. The Child Care Committee did a survey of women who work inside and outside the home on their need for child care. What were their basic concerns? What did they need? They did conferences and speakers on what child care quality really is about. Sitting a kid in front of a television for the whole day is not quality child care. And so we're trying to get decent child care, which is more expensive. So the access issue, the costs of good care. Through education and publishing results of the child care survey, they advocated for expanded child care options in Lincoln and Lancaster County. They led the work to establish Lincoln's first downtown child care center. We would not have had it had not. I have such confidence in these women I worked with, such confidence in the things they got done. And that child care thing was a big mountain to climb, and they did it. They climbed it with all of us right there, part of the Army behind them, helping them testify at the City Council, and doing our best to do what we could to help them succeed. Interpersonal relations was another committee. We worked with UNL Sociology Department, surveyed community about formal and informal relationships among people, that is marriage, living together, all that sort of stuff. We were co-presenters with UNL Sociology at a conference on relationships, including how they work, the benefits and problems between men and women. The conference included parent relationships with children and how those relationships works in adoptive and foster care families, blended families, single parent families. We did speakers bureau and seminars on issues such as the changing roles of men and women in interpersonal relationships and in their families. We held a conference on violence toward women growing out of the relationships, the whole interpersonal relationships thing. We helped co-sponsor self-defense class for women at YWCA to help address the victim mentality among women, seeing ourselves as victims and unable to help ourselves. We helped raise them, and many women on the Women's Commission helped raise the money for the first friendship home, and were active in that. We had a legislation committee. When you mentioned Ina Mae Rouse was going to be part of this, Ina Mae was hilarious. She was a real leader on the legislation committee, and she was especially concerned about the issues for older women. And that is issues like, what are you going to do about Social Security? Or are you going to have any? What's it going to be? Are you planning for that? Are you developing a 401k at your workplace, et cetera, et cetera? But the legislation committee did a lot more than that. The mayor, the city council, and the county board all considered the commission to be advisory to them. Therein lies the rub. And therefore not properly involved in testifying on issues or advocating in the legislature. They did not want us to go to the legislature. And Helen Gonzalez was tremendously supportive and tried to help us as much as she could, but it kind of made her hair slowly rise on her head when we went to the legislature and said, and another thing, and and we did. The commission said there's no point in having information about the proper course of action for women if we did nothing about that, no action. Then we just have a file sitting on a shelf somewhere. So we tiptoed part of the way to the legislature and ran the rest of the way and did what we needed to do. We kept advocating in the legislature, but always prefaced our testimony by announcing our status as the advisory group to the mayor and the city council and the county board. And the state senators, many of them who were, the men particularly who were supportive of us, just kind of snickered and laughed and said, sure you are. Anyway, we testified on financial support for older women, especially Social Security, and what needed to be financial equity in work, because that made a difference in what kind of retirement women had under Nebraska law. There was a law in the legislature, being considered in the legislature, that it would allow a male farmer to go to town, take a loan out of the bank, and not have his wife co-sign. He signed, that was enough. And there were women whose husbands died who were stuck with being out of their homes because they didn't know they had a mortgage and they were unprepared completely to pay the mortgage. But the law at that time was going to be they were responsible for that mortgage, whether they knew about and whether they co-signed or not. And we worked really, really hard on that one. Ina Mae did, Vicki Horton did, Donna Carnes, God rest her, did. A lot of great women worked on that. And we had a lot of help from some wonderful men. Steve Fowler, back in those days when he represented this legislative district, District 27. Dinah Shimmick came after him and did a great job too. Dave Landis, who works for the city of Lincoln, was a state senator in those days. Don Wesley was a state senator in those days. And we had tremendous support from Senator Chambers, who was, that would surprise a lot of people. He said all the time, very loudly and clearly, that he was there to represent his district in Omaha. But when it came to issues of fairness toward women, he was a sure and steady voice in the legislature. I will always bless his name and be so glad he helped us a lot on that bill. The bill did not pass. Women have to be co-signatories or they can't be held responsible for a loan they didn't sign. And that's wonderful. That's a small victory, but that was a big deal to us. We advocated for expanding nurses' roles, including the certified nurse midwives. The state law had to change for that. We advocated for the budget for the Nebraska Commission on the Status of Women, which provided programs and seminars in the general community to women across the state. The legislation committee also did seminars for other women's groups on topics such as older women's financial outlook, preparing for old age through IRAs, savings, and so forth. Inheritance from spouses, Social Security, understanding family finances and budget. And when there were a lot of women at the time who said, my husband does all that, and had not a clue as to how much money they had in the bank, who they owed, or anything. And Ina Mae, I always think of Ina Mae because she was so instrumental in that committee in doing what needed to be done. The Education Committee was my home committee. We advocated at the Lincoln Public Schools board meeting for combating the sticky floor for women of color particularly, not being able to advance in the school system as we thought they should, and the glass ceiling for white women who couldn't go past could advance but then not past a certain point, to make way for more women in leadership roles in the public schools here in Lincoln. We advocated at the LPS board meeting for increased salaries for teachers. We worked with the Lincoln Education Association on that, partnered with them. We advocated at the LPS board for serious enforcement of Title IX of the Educational Amendments of 1972, way back. Sports for girls and parity for women in athletics and everywhere else in the public schools. Schools all over the country were saying, oh well, and kind of disregarding that. And there weren't women's athletics that were on. I mean, women had a cardboard box for a locker room and didn't have adequate team sports, and we advocated for changes and all that. As part of Title IX enforcement, we helped establish the Educational Equity Committee of the Lincoln Public Schools with representatives from teachers, administration, other LPS staff, parents, and the Commission on Status of Women Educational Committee. And the Educational Equity Committee heard complaints on Title IX enforcement and resolved problems. And that was a committee that was active. Through that, one of the LPS representatives was Joe Rowson, God rest him. And he got to know us. And I was on that committee of Lincoln Public Schools with Joe, and said, you're great, you ought to come and be a commissioner on the Women's Commission. Joe was either the first or one of the very first men who served as a commissioner on the status of women, commissioner on the commission, and did so because we started that relationship with Lincoln Public Schools, and he saw how important that was and how well that Educational Equity Committee worked when we did it. That Educational Equity Committee, public schools.
Can you start with the Education Committee?
Okay, the Educational Equity Committee was nationally recognized. Lincoln Public Schools was recognized nationally for its innovation and dedication to fairness in public schools. And one of the people on the Child Care Committee said, I could see Rosemary's hand in all of this stuff, and Lincoln Public Schools got the credit. That doesn't seem fair. And we all said it doesn't matter who gets the credit. We want it done. And that was a big thing for us. We advocated for women, faculty, staff, and administration and students in the same ways that LPS and the committee as a whole took stands also. And not only did we do things for LPS and all the other groups I've talked about, but the commission as a whole took stands, did research and took stands. 2 examples. Women's names, along with their husbands, you couldn't get them in the Lincoln telephone book. You were Mrs. John, but you weren't Betty and John. And it took us forever, it seemed, to convince Lincoln Telephone and Telegraph back in those days that women should have their names so that they could read, so that if you were looking for a woman friend you'd met, you had no idea what her husband's name was, and you didn't know she shouldn't be attached to her husband like a piece of, like chattel, and instead have her own name and her own identity in the phone book. And yes, really, it happened exactly that way, and amazing. We got it done, and it took a while, but we persevered. And mostly what it took was just getting people used to a completely different way of looking at women and women's identities and women's roles and so on. A second thing we did that I was very proud of as well, Chris Funk brought to our attention that the Agency for International Development was giving Depo-Provera, a birth control product, to women in some African nations when some doctors here in this country would not give their patients Depo-Provera because of the risk of cancer. And we wrote, the commission said, we can't see another woman treated like a laboratory animal. If we know about it, we have to do something. And there were people who said, on the city council, who said, you have nothing to do with Africa. And we said, of course we do. We have something to do with women all over the world. That's the whole point. And so we wrote to...
I accidentally bumped the camera. Could you start with, we told the committee about Africa. Start with that statement about we do have something to do with it.
Chris Funk talked to us about Depo-Provera being used with women in African and third world nations in Africa as birth control when doctors in this country were not prescribing it to patients because they thought it was too dangerous. carcinogens, cancer producing. And so we decided, even though there were some city council members who thought we were going way too far with advocating for African women, that was the whole point of women is that it's global. And the things that we did, we thought about as globally as we possibly could. We didn't have the human power and the money to do what we'd like to do, but we did say this is egregious. So we wrote a letter to U.S. Senator Exon regarding the Agency for International Development, and he went to the AID, and some other people got excited, and we talked to our own family doctors about such things and asked them if they would write letters to Senator Exon to back up what we were saying, and they stopped using Depo-Provera, the Agency for International Development, and stopped using it on these women. And so we said, don't stop using birth control products, just find ones that won't kill them with cancer. And so that's what happened. Annually, the Commission on Status of Women chair, vice chair, committee chairs testified at the budget hearings of the City of Lincoln and Lancaster County Board to renew financial support of the commission. We did it every year. We prepared for a fight every year. Not a fist fight, not angry, nasty things, but we were prepared for opponents of the commission to come to the city council and say these women are baby killers because of our stand on abortion. And some women were perfectly willing to say that, some women and some men as well, and other things. We hooked up with Nebraskans for Peace on several conferences, and a woman actually said, why would you ever think peace is a woman's issue? I can hardly stand saying it now. Anyway, duh. We prepared for a fight every year. And we contacted people to write letters and make phone calls to the city council and the county board. And we had people show up with little badges or little buttons that said, I'm a friend of the Women's Commission. And one year they said, the badges said, I'm a friend of the Women's Commission and I vote. And so we had people fill the city council chambers, like 350 strong, poured out into the outside courtyard, sometimes outside on the steps, there to listen to our whole budget and applaud the Women's Commission and say, and we were all testifying as to what all we had done. We kept track of volunteer hours on the committees and kept track of how much money we got paid, like 6 cents an hour for the things we were doing, how much the city got out of the commission for what it put into the commission, how much money we saved, and how much we did for women with what we had. Every year it was like that, and there were people testifying against us, as I say. But after the budget hearing, our supporters wrote notes and made phone calls again to follow up with one more round of support. And we managed to get funding every year. It wasn't easy. Sometimes it was really tough. But we got funding, and that was something we just prepared to do.
I'm hearing a slight tap on the microphone. I don't know. But it's only when your hand is... I can't quite see it.
I'm not tapping.
Okay. Now it's gone.
Okay.
If it comes again, I'm going to do this.
One of the things that we did for a fundraiser, this sounds like how could this possibly work? And we sort of specialized in the how could this possibly work fundraisers. Are these people crazy? Fundraisers. We decided to have a winter blues bash in January when everybody's got the blahs and is saying, oh, ick, Christmas is over and this is no fun, and there's snow and it's cold. And so every January or the early part of February, depending on when the Super Bowl was, we asked Larry Beamer and his partner who owned the Zoo Bar at that time if they would be willing to open the Zoo Bar on a Sunday night, which they never did. If we guaranteed them we'd get a whole lot of people there and they could get the gate from all the ticket sales from drinks. And people drank, didn't drink to excess. It was Sunday night, they had to go to work Monday. But we started at like 5:30 or 6 o'clock. And the commissioners, believe it or not, commissioners, committee members, all kinds of people, like 100 people, made hors d'oeuvres and brought them. Larry Beamer said, perfect, that people will have to buy a drink to wash down the hors d'oeuvres. They made money hand over fist at the bar, and we got Magic Slim and the Teardrops and a couple of other groups to play for part of the gate, promised them part of the gate. And they trusted that we'd get the gate, that we'd be good for the money, and they took us a cut in salary, in their pay, from their usual gigs. And
Hearing that tapping again, I have no idea what that might be.
I don't know.
Maybe if you hold it, try to hold it really still, just kind of
Okay,
at your. There, it sounds great. No,
okay.
no tapping at all. Sorry.
Anyway, we got the bands to play on Sunday night, which was amazing, which meant they had to stay over from gigs on Saturday night and play for a reduced cost. And the first year we had 350 people crammed into the zoo bar. $10 tickets. That was another thing we tried to do, really low cost or no cost events for women so that lots of women and men could come. And women and men, city council members and county board members and all kinds of people from all kinds of walks of life all over the city came to the blues bash. And the zoo bar sold lots of drinks. They were happy. And as I said, we brought homemade hors d'oeuvres, and the cost was $10 for the tickets. The first year, we had between 250 and 300 people. And the next year, we had nearly 400 people bought tickets. Maybe not all of them came to the event, but we were crammed in that place. The zoo bar isn't very big anyway. We were crammed in that place like crazy. We also raised some money at an annual dinner we had every year when we gave the Alice Paul Award. We did all kinds of things like that, but the Winter Blues Bash turned out to be a real moneymaker for us because the bands were willing to play for very little. Magic Slim said it was one of the nicest experiences he ever had to do something for women in the community, and it was one of the reasons he started getting interested in Lincoln as a home for himself and his family instead of just visiting here. So we had a wonderful time. We worked like crazy. Almost all of us worked full-time outside the home, and many women had husbands and children, and managed to do all of this work, give all of these hours, care deeply, deeply, refuse to be backed off or backed up or run over by anybody. When we testified at the city council, all the commission members were there, all the committee members were there. I mean, there were hundreds of people from the commission itself. When I went to testify at the Lincoln Board of Education meetings, I looked back and I saw the child care committee sitting there supporting me. Saw the employment committee, saw the legislation committee. It is a wonderful experience to have that connection with women and to say, together we can't be beaten. Together we're powerful enough to get a lot of stuff done. It was a great time in my life. I loved it, loved it, loved it. The harder we worked, the more I loved it. And I love it still, and I love the women who are around still. We've lost some terrific women through death by cancer, unfortunately. And that's a shame. I wish they were still around to talk about their experiences on the commission too. But people like Ina May will be wonderful, and Natalie. And Lynn Roper was on the education committee. In fact, I got to know her first on the education committee, and she was a chair of the education committee when I first came on. So these are terrific women, just terrific women.
What would you like women today to know, especially young women? What would you say to them?
Don't ever think the fight is over. Don't think that for a second. We have state senators in states all over the country who are trying to reverse the Roe versus Wade decision on abortion. And if you think that can't happen, it certainly can. What they decided to do was, since the Supreme Court made their decision, they'd go after states and try to get states to make increasingly restrictive laws. You have to say to the woman who's getting an abortion, do you know you're killing a human being? I mean, that sort of stuff. Increasingly restrictive laws. All of that can be taken away from us, and people have tried really hard to do that. In Texas, women are up in arms about what they've tried to do in the legislature in Texas. So don't believe that the fight is over or that we've won and that's all and we can go on to the next thing. We have to revisit some of these issues. Gay rights is very much like the old civil rights of the days of Dr. King and Malcolm, when I was coming up and doing things for civil rights. And they've made some, gay people and have made real progress, and all of us with them. I mean, every time there's a finite pool of human rights.
Can you start with gay people have made some real progress?
Gay people have made some real progress. There's more to make, but the fact is, it's better than it was. I left the Lancaster Commission on the Status of Women, and Helen Busala said she wanted to appoint me to the Human Rights Commission in the city of Lincoln. So I went there and became the chair of the Human Rights Commission, and worked on that for about 4 years. And during that time, the Gay Rights Amendment came up And and the Human Rights Commission, I'm proud to say, supported the Gay Rights Amendment and put it to a vote, and the city voted it down without question. But the point was, we had the guts to do something about it. And all those little steps, even if they don't result in absolute victory, are necessary to get where we've gotten today. And so human rights and civil rights are not finite. There's not a little pool of them, and if I don't grab mine, somebody else will get theirs and get mine too. Human rights are infinite. We can all be treated like human beings, fairly and with dignity. And that's what I believe that's what the women's movement is about. I think it grew out of civil rights, and it grew out of women who were empowered through civil rights in the late 50s and early 60s. And I really believe my father said, this is the fight your generation is going to have to keep fighting, Rosemary. And I think it happens all the time. The other thing I think is we have to be careful how we think about other women and what we call other women. The words we use to identify other women, even when we say we're just joking. I don't like the B word associated with women. I don't like to hear women call it. I don't like to hear them say, she's my B. I don't like that deprecating language that we sometimes use on each other. I don't like the competition instead of cooperation that so often still happens. She wants my boyfriend, and suddenly she's a terrible person. I want women to understand what joy can come and what real progress can come for all women if we work together. And that's something that we cannot, the battle's not won. It happens day after day, week after week. It's the human condition, I really believe. And the older I get, the more I believe that I still have work to do, that all of us still have work to do. And it's a joy to do it. When you work with people like I worked with on the commission, it's fun. And we laughed our heads off, and we cried, and we did everything in between, and got mad, and did what we had to do to get the job done. And I wouldn't have given up those years on the commission for anything.
Wonderful. That was just fantastic. I just can't tell you how wonderful. I mean, there's so many things in there that we want to quote that we will never be able to. You're going to be the whole show.
I didn't expect to be the whole show. What I expected is to give you enough ammunition.
Oh, you did a great job. And what you said at the end was so powerful, because civil rights are everyone's rights, and that's women's rights, and we can never believe that they're already done.
Yeah.
We're still fighting the same fights. I mean, every day we fight the same fights. It's discouraging in a way, and yet it just makes us know that we have to fight harder.
And Dr. King said, you can't do everything, but everybody can do something.
That's right.
You don't have to do a great big monumental anything. I just joined a committee when I was in graduate school at UNL, and stayed with it and loved it, and read and read and read. I thought I knew a little bit about the struggle for women's equality. I knew nothing. I mean, I read books and books and books and books. Sisterhood is Global, Sisterhood is Powerful, and everything in between, Betty Friedan, and so on. Teaching myself and learning from the other women on the commission who also read and had experiences of their own.
Right. So
women can teach each other so much if we'll just let other women into our lives and let them help us. So I learned enormously.
That's great. That's great. And the knowledge that you passed on to others is immeasurable too. Totally. That's so wonderful.
What fun.
Well, yeah. It sounds like you really did have a great group of people.
Yes.
What an energized group of people, and fun to be a part of it.
Yes. And we'd get discouraged and say, oh man, this is going to fall, this is never going to happen. And then we'd say, no, can't do that. We have to keep going and keep going and keep going. We don't want apathy to win.
That's right. That's right.
So
Great. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
you're welcome. Thank you.